Hey everyone, Chris Sawyer here. The Varietal Show is back. I am here at Talisman Winery and we're in Sonoma. This is my great friend Scott Rich. And, everyone talks about, the Varietal Show. That's a great name, Chris. Oh, where'd you get that? Ah, ha, ha. Well, the Varietal Show is actually a term, if you know TV, back in the old days. There's like Dick Cavett Show, there's Carol Burnett, Lawrence Welk. In modern times, we have Saturday Night Live. You guys ever see that? Of course you do. It's a really great concept where you have people that have the abilities to dance, sing, act, all these things together, and they're fun. And, when I think about Pinot Noir, I think about a lot of fun factors in a great bottle of Pinot Noir and a great glass of Pinot Noir. And that is that it's all about the sight. So it's about in these kinds of shows, they were all about the background and how cool it was when you saw these guys dancing and acting in front of it. But when we talk about Pinot, it's all about the sight. That's the first thing. And then we start talking about the plantings and how old are the plantings there and what kind of clones are these plantings. It's so interesting. And Scott Rich is one of my great friends who, in my opinion, gave really the definition of what a boutique winery is to a winery a long time ago. And you and Marta started this winery so long ago, and we'll go into that in a second. But the fact is that they've remained right there, focused on these small vineyards, small little clonal selections from these vineyards. And you know what? They taste amazing every single time. So that's why I'm here with you, Scott, today.
Cool.
You and I met back a long time ago, the A2 days when you were there. Tony Soder, one of our great friends that we share, and you know how much I love your wines. And Marta's been a great friend of mine, and you've been a great friend of mine for so long. Here we are tasting some of your new releases, and this is a really special one from Russian River Valley. Tell us a little bit about this one to start out with.
So this is 2018 Gunsalas Vineyard, and the vineyard is in Green Valley in sort of a banana belt. It's a really interesting area. We've got 4 different clones in this vineyard, and it's on sort of a west-facing slope. It is always the first vineyard that we pick.
Yeah.
There's something about that location, the exposure, the aspect, and the fact that we never have a very large fruit load on there.
Yeah.
So we always get wines with great concentration, well-developed flavors, and great ripeness.
Wow. And this is a young wine, you guys. This is 2018. That's young for them.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, that's one thing that you have been you're a very patient man. He is. He actually is. Who else out there is really patient? Are you guys? I'm not. I'm not very patient. But it's one of those things. These wines really need a little bit of time to open up. We're looking down here at the barrels that are sitting there waiting for their someday they'll all be bottled too. But it takes time, and this is the 2018s are new releases for this winery, and that's because you have the rights to do that.
Yeah, the way that it works for us, I used to go to restaurants and look at their wine lists, and everything on the wine list was recently released.
Yeah.
And I like wines with a little bit of age. It's like having a conversation with an infant.
Yes.
when you're having newly released wines.
Good point.
And I realized that I felt like I was committing an infanticide. These restaurateurs don't have the storage capacity or the money to be able to sit on wines for a long time. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was help them with that.
Yeah.
And so all of our wines spend at least 18 months in barrel, and then they all get at least a year of bottle age before we release them. And we don't really release on a schedule. What we do is we sit down with our entire staff. So Marta and I and the folks in our tasting room sit down, taste all the relatively new wines blind, and decide what should be released in the near term, what should be released in the long term.
Yeah.
And we simply do it that way. We've got the luxury of being able to sit on things until they sort of hit their stride and are really touching base.
Yeah, that's great. You know, this is fun because you really do give the stats on the back, and it's a really good read too. And one of the great things that you say is it's spunky west facing. Spunky west facing. So that's a good term, you guys. Spunky west facing. And it's also one thing that this is kind of a little bit of a departure from some of the things that you do. Most of them that you do have a lot of variations of clones. These are all Dijon clones, but it's got the old Dijon and the new Dijon together, which is very interesting. There was a period there, the Dijon clones were all brought in from the Dijon region or from the Institute in Dijon above Burgundy. And the interesting thing about that is that they came in two different series of time. The 13, which is in here, the 14 and the 15 were in the original ones, and the 667 and 777 were in the second phase.
Yeah.
But they, I think that you and I agree on this. It's not really what California needed. We do ripen. In Oregon, where they came into, they have a very short series, so they had to ripen a little bit faster there. We have plenty of sun here. That is not a problem here in California. So this is just a very interesting site, though, because it's looking out at the ocean, pretty much. I mean, not directly, but, it's in Green Valley, which it can get cold, and it does get cold in the afternoons. I mean, because that wind comes into Petaluma Gap, but it's also swirling right there in Green Valley.
Yeah.
So this is a really great example of the Dijon clone setting that can work, and we see it out there in the Sonoma coast as well.
Yeah, and this vineyard also has Gold Ridge soils, which is sort of the gold standard in western Sonoma County.
Yeah. Another thing about just talking about clones and stuff, and just sites in general, and why I really respect Scott and the brand so much, is most of the grapes out there, most of the vineyards and everything out there, the majority of them were planted in 1999 to 2000. Those are it was like a huge swirl of grapes vines that were planted all at the same time. Right in that was like the heart of when Pinot Noir went. And believe me, the Sideways movie came out in 2004. Guess what? We had fruit. Well, go figure. And it was not planned that way. It wasn't. At least not that I know of. But the fact is that it was a really interesting period. You were making wines before that. When did you start?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my first wines were made in 1988.
Yeah.
And I was working as a researcher for a winery called R.H. Phillips.
Yeah.
They were really, really pioneering. They were the very first winery in the world to do night picking.
Yeah.
And they sort of perfected it, and it was because they were in a region where it got really hot during the day.
Yeah.
And so they, in order to get the fruit in great condition, they had to pick at night.
Yeah. It gets really hot out there where R.H. Phillips was.
Really hot. Every one of our growers now picks at night. Yeah. And it's become the norm.
It's the norm, yeah. And we also can thank our great San Giacomo family here for bringing it into this valley too. Yeah. I mean, absolutely 100%. So that was an amazing expression of Russian River Valley. But you have been very diverse in your regions that you represent. So this is a lovely, lovely wine right now. It's tasting beautiful. It's got a lot of fruit in there. It's fragrant. It's elegant. There's, a lot of that plum and cherry kind of components are there, and then it kind of builds around that. But the silky texture is what really gets me. I love that silky texture. It's great.
Well, and texture to me is one of the most important things with Pinot Noir. It should always be voluptuous and rich and velvety and just fill your mouth with goodness.
Well, that's great. I love that. Filling our mouths with goodness. Of course, that's our expectations at all times, right, guys? So the next one we're going to taste, actually, we're going to go here. We're going to taste the Red Dog. So this is Red Dog, and this is from Sonoma Mountain. This is actually very, very close to Scott and Marta's house up there on the mountain. And from here, we're on 8th Street here in Sonoma, where they have their facility is. They have a great tasting room in Glen Ellen, which is one of the cutest little tasting rooms ever. If you come here to Sonoma Valley, it is right across the street from Glen Ellen Star, which is one of the best restaurants in Sonoma County. And it's just a lovely place. This is really above that area right there, above Glen Ellen.
Yeah. And it's fascinating because there's a ridge that runs through the property. We've got Pomard planted on the west-facing side, And then we've got Dijon 115 and 777 planted on the east-facing side. But the influence of cold air and fog coming across the Petaluma Gap is so great there that the west-facing slope ripens later than the east-facing slope.
I would assume so.
It gets hammered by cold air.
Yeah, which is interesting because when you're here and there's kind of that fog trapped in this valley, and the sun comes up on the east side and shines down there, so it doesn't really have that much time.
Right.
But what really happens on the west side is it does get that late afternoon, but it's going to get cold pretty fast because that fog will come in and you cannot stop it.
No, I will be down at my house down towards the bottom of the mountain, and I'm perfectly comfortable in shorts and a t-shirt. Yeah. I go up there in the afternoon, I've got to wear a sweatshirt. Mm-hmm. And one of the other things that's really, really cool about this, Sonoma Mountain is a very, very small AVA. And it's not that well known, but it turns out that it's a stellar place for Pinot Noir.
It is. It has great soils that are lifted up.
Yeah, we've got 3 different vineyards on Sonoma Mountain. We've got 2 on sort of the north end of it, and most of that is sort of volcanic mud flow because the entire mountain chain was volcanic. But then we've got Wildcat Mountain on the south end of it, and that's much more rocky and andesitic, and this was a much rockier sort of volcanic thing going on at the south end of the mountain.
I love this. This is vivacious. To say that's a very good word for it. Vivacious. It just really is lively, fresh, wonderful. It has a very spirited kind of feel to it in the mouth, especially that little citrus. Like it's almost like a blood orange kind of squeeze that you put in there, or just like did something with the peels. But obviously you didn't. These are all grapes, you guys. These are ingredient ideas, concepts. But it's so good. I mean, it's just it fills the mouth with happiness. There's nothing wrong with that, you guys. That's what everyone should do. I just think it's just a delicious example of really what a great site can do, and it's up there, and this is pretty high up there, and this is this is where we're talking about clones again, but this is a historical thing that he and I got to know because of Carneros. Carneros is right out this way, and this is up on the hill. So this is the Pomard clone. This is clone 5. And this was really propagated right out here in Carneros at the Stanley Ranch. This goes way back to 1951, and Professor Olmo at UC Davis and bringing this into the United States and really propagating it there in Carneros. And we've really found that this has become like really one of the best clones. And you know what, up in Oregon, they grow a lot of it, and it usually is my favorite wines have some Pomard in them up there in Oregon. And they can find those places. They just didn't know it off the bat. And they didn't have the other clones before that, but when you get these grapes, and especially with a little bit of age, this is 2000, so these are 23-year-old vines now. This was 18-year-old vines at the time when this was put out. This is 2018 vintage. How have you really seen the flavors of this specific, bottling really kind of improve and just become like more interesting in learning its character?
Well, what I find is newly planted vineyards, the first year or two of production, are often really, really expressive and really interesting, and it's because we've got these tiny canopies and we've got a very small fruit load. Yeah. So everything ripens well, and it's concentrated because the fruit load is small. Yeah. And then they sort of go through an adolescent stage, not unlike a lot of us as teenagers, where we're a little bit more unruly, and things are it's a little bit more challenging. And then they get to a certain age where suddenly things change and they click, and they become mature vines, and they reliably produce these wines that are just a notch above where they were before because they've adapted to their place. And that's where I get really excited about vineyards, and most of our vineyards have been in the ground for quite a while.
Yeah, and I love it.
And that's one of the things that we seek out when we're looking for vineyards. Yeah, is we want vineyards in most cases that have been in the ground for a while.
This has a real blackberry flavor to it too. I mean, even like you smell like you feel like you're down by the creek and you just found these blackberries and you're just like kind of throwing them in your mouth. And I mean the smell too. I mean, it's got a beautiful berry smell right on it, and it's got, there's an earth tone, there's a little bit of minerality, there's, it's on a lifted surface that's at 800 feet up there. It's amazing.
Yeah, and ironically, a lot of vineyards we work with have blackberries growing on the edges of the vineyard. I always find correlations between the quality of the blackberries and the quality of the grapes.
Yeah.
And where the blackberries are really, really tasty, the grapes are really, really tasty.
Amazing. Well, that's a fabulous wine. So those are 2018 vintage new releases that we love. And as Scott was saying, one of the great things about him in general, just why I respect him so much and why we get along so well and why we love eating food when we see each other. He actually had an 80s party one time that was awesome. That was just about when him and Marta started making wines. And we drank a lot of old 80s bottles and ate a lot of great food and listened to crazy 80s music. But this is the 2016, and this is a Method Ancien. This is from a Swan selection. So that's the Swan selection. It is a clone that it does have, that thing, but we call it a special selection. This was really, it has a whole history, but it's called the Swan clone just because of Joseph Swan actually being known for it. And Francis Mahoney, our great friend Francis Mahoney, who really used this in a vineyard that he really made a research vineyard for UC Davis. Right there in Carneros Creek Winery, the first winery of Carneros after Prohibition. And it was a great testing zone. And this is really from a very special vineyard that's in Carneros called the Adastra Vineyard. Tell us a little bit about this.
Adastra we've been working with longer than any other vineyard. I started working with these folks in 1996 when I was at Etude.
Yep.
And they are in a sort of strange place. It's a little bit low-lying.
Yeah.
And the vineyards on either side of it look just like normal vineyards, but the Adastra vineyard looks a little bit different, and it's because the soils are, they're only about that deep.
Yeah.
And then you hit a layer of hardpan.
Yeah.
And so it really restricts the growth of the vines.
Yeah.
And one of the observations that I've made is that the very best vineyards are the ones that require the least management. So in other words,
that's good to know. Fine fact.
You have shoots that are spaced correctly. Instead of the shoots growing during the season and going up way over the top of the trellis and needing a lot of trimming and removing of laterals, the very best vineyards sort of grow to the top of the trellis and then they stop.
Wow.
And they shift to fruit ripening mode instead of vegetative mode. Yeah. And
we don't like
Adastra
vegetative.
always does.
We have
that.
vegetables. We don't need vegetative.
Yeah,
grapes.
Adastra always does that. It's always got a very small canopy, both in terms of density and height. Fruit load on it is moderate because of the site, and again for Pinot Noir, it always comes back to site.
That's great. Well, this is one of the things. This has got the hair clay loam. So when you go out to Carneros today, it's like just this beautiful sweeping area, and it's rolling hills covered with vineyards and everything. Back when I was a kid, it was sheep. There were not that many vineyards out there, you guys. You think there were? No, there were not. And actually, my grandparents would make me actually count sheep, and that would put me to sleep in the car usually because I'd get to about 400 and start to fade, and they'd put me out, so I would shut up in the car. Well, smart idea. Today, if you tried to count vineyard rows, you would get dizzy and probably run out of. You just couldn't keep counting. It's very different out there now, but it was at one point, we talk about, this was a stagecoach way over the mountains here. Well, why'd you go over the mountains when you could have just gone through there? It was so mucky, clay-like in the wet seasons when you didn't have paved roads that it wasn't really that passable.
It wasn't passable.
It wasn't, and that's because of this deadpan kind of clay-like thing, and the hair loam is from, there's a hair ranch up there, and it's right there on the kind of the edge of Sonoma and Napa counties, and it's a really interesting outlook where you can look and see San Francisco right from the hair property there. but it's clay, and this is a really distinctive flavor. I've always liked this. The Adastra, they make their own wines too. The
They
Adastra,
actually make them here.
yeah. Well, smart. Give him give him the fruit and let him make it. But Chris he's a doctor, very good man, and he used to bring the wines in for me to taste. When I was at the lodge at Sonoma for 10 years as sommelier there. And it was just great when he'd come in and he'd have all the stories about, this vintage really, God, it was a hard one, but it really wasn't that hard versus everyone else out there that had all this other machinery to take care of their problems. But fantastic wine. I mean, this is a 2016, so this is another reason that when you find someone like this and a brand like this, the Talisman, it's a boutique brand, and why these wines are better with a little bit of age, and they do it for you. They don't even release them until they're ready. It's a benefit for you, and the fact is that these age well too. So it's not like it's done and like they're ready now. They're at a point where they're drinking well, and they're really going to start pairing with different things as they progress in the bottle. So
yeah, and this wine is going to get better for the next 15, 20 years. Little known fact about Jim Hare, whose family the Soil series is named after. Yeah. At one point, he held the world record for the fastest Volkswagen on the planet.
Fastest Volkswagen?
Yeah. Yeah, he had a turbocharged Volkswagen that he drag raced.
Yeah. Now, if you guys win a trivia contest and a lot of money for that answer, don't forget about us, okay? Please. Okay. Yeah. But, I mean, it's great. You just had this for dinner, didn't you?
I had this for dinner last night.
What'd you have it with?
We had it with a bunch of stir-fried veggies and rice.
Oh, my God.
And lots and lots of umami in the stir-fried veggies. So this worked really, really well. And it was a bottle that had been open for a couple of days. And it had gotten better over the time that it had been opened.
I'm digging on this thing.
And this is unusual because it was made with 100% whole clusters. So no de-stimming. This is the way that Burgundians made wine before they had machines.
Yeah, and it really does have that strength to it. It's got a structural thing going on. I could see it going fine with like a little touch of soy sauce going on in there. Some definitely veggies, but cooked and nice little rice and everything. I mean, that's actually what we had last night too. Crazy. I did it with a rosé, but whatever. It wasn't as good as this. And it's just, I mean, this is tasting extremely good right now. But once again, it's incredibly balanced. As we said, seamless. This is a seamless wine at this point, and that's a really important thing because sometimes bigger wineries they release because the demand is there, and they have to meet their quotas and they have to do things like that. And so, are the wines ready to be released? Not necessarily, and you'll find out. Even though they might get great reviews, that doesn't mean that they're drinking that great when they're young. That could mean that the reviewer, like I do, taste it when it's fresh, right there, all pop, and I also taste it the next morning. So I want to see where it's going. I don't want to just like base it on that because some of them just aren't ready.
No, they're often not.
And I think that this wine is a great example of something that we just popped at this up just now.
Yeah.
And so it's a fun thing. Another thing about this region and Russian River Valley too. Both of them. This is I will date this right now, but we are in 2023 right now. This is the 40-year anniversary of both of those AVAs.
I didn't realize
isn't that fun, you guys? Read my book, you'll find out. But they are both celebrating their 40-year anniversaries this year. And like we talked about some of the wineries that really were instrumental in there, especially when we talked about Francis Mahoney and Adastra and Etude. In Carneros, and when you get, you go back there and Davis Bynum and Rocchioli and all the, great producers, Rodney Strong and some of the people that were there, Deloach, that were really making Pinot Noir back in the old days. These are some of the ones from Russian River Valley before all the big boom started. That was really happening. And of course, we did mention another one, Joseph Swan. You have to mention Joseph Swan, and we even mentioned the clone. So now you know a lot about those areas. So we're going to take one more dive into a little bit even more interesting concept here, and that is, can these wines really get even better with a little bit of time in the bottle. And we have a great example here. This is Ted's Vineyard. This is Russian River Valley from 2004, you guys. 2004 vintage. And so we're talking about 19 years ago. These grapes were not even quite 19. It was 18 and a half years ago. These grapes were picked. And this became one of those things that, or maybe the other way around. I don't even know the math part there, but it was basically, they were picked in 2004. And that's the most important thing. Canned Pinot Noir, everyone goes, oh, Cabernet is so age-worthy. Petit Syrah, another good example of one that can really age. Pinot Noir can age. It's got this thing called acid, you guys, and it's natural acid. And that's really what makes Pinot Noir so great. You know, it's not, acidity in Cabernet is not easy. And in a lot of cases, you add acid. Or you put other grapes in there that have better acid than Cabernet. And the other thing about Cabernet and Pinot Noir that are very different from one another is that Pinot Noir grapes and vines, they grow for a long time. We just haven't had enough experience with that here in California, to be really honest. And that's why I say we've got the 1999 to 2000 vintages, and we keep following these vines that were planted here way after, like, Sanford and Benedict down in Santa Barbara was planted, or some of the ones of David Lett up in Willamette Valley, and the ones here that Francis Mahoney and the Martini planted there in Carneros are great examples of old vineyards with some of these old vines, especially Saintsbury and some of those Lee Vineyard designates that were old vines. Cabernet, about 40 to 50 years is what they got, and then their yields go down. They're just not producing fruit like it is. This is more comparable with Zinfandel, where, you know, we look forward to the future of Pinot Noir, and these vines with more age, they're only going to get better, and it's because they have a little attitude. I think the vines have attitude, just like Zinfandel vines are. They're pissed at Mother Nature sometimes, and they have stories about humans if they could only tell, but they can't. And so, you know, they've got some issues, and they work them out when in the bottles. And I think that this is a really great example of that. It's got that, you know, great earth tone on the nose right there. I mean, it's definitely got a gingerbread house, and there's all this fruit underneath it, and there's like some dried fruit, some fresh fruit, and there's these layers that are going on in here. This is 2004, you guys.
And it's just now starting to show those sort of tertiary aging components. But underneath all of that, especially in the mouth, is still this very, very vibrant fruit.
On the nose, it smells like a black truffle, you know?
It sort of does.
Yeah, it does. I kind of want some risotto right now. And I think that would be a really neat one. You know, especially if you had like imagine this. I'm going to make all of you hungry right now. So this is a risotto with, we just shaved some black truffle on it. And then we also put kind of a little lamb chop right on top of that. And then we put blackberry reduction all around the base of it in kind of a bowl shape thing. Are you there with us? Can you do this? Because I think this wine would be amazing with it.
This would be really good with that.
Hope I made you all hungry and thirsty for more Talisman wine.
Yeah, this is really, really cool. I appreciate these wines when they get some age on them and they start to differentiate themselves from younger wines.
The texture on that is so brilliant. You know, there's a lot of licorice kind of things in the back end.
There's a lot of licorice going on.
A lot of licorice. And man, it is just, it's full bodied, but it's round full bodied. You know, it's like filling the mouth on the sides. It's not like, it's a big powerhouse, but it does have that depth. And that's why I say lamb, you could do this, but it's also worthy of putting with, you know, you get black truffle, some resource for that. You want it to be a damn good wine to go with that. You don't like, you pay that much money for black truffles. You know, you gotta have a wine.
It's gotta be good.
It's gotta be good.
Yeah. Yeah. Something else that's funny about this wine. I don't know if it's funny, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
I've had a number of really, really wonderful mentors during my career.
Me too.
And when we took our production from a whopping 200 cases, which we've been from 1993 to 1998. I wanted, and those were all Carneros wines, and I wanted to branch out into the Russian River. And so earlier in my career, Mary Edwards had been one of my mentors. And I called her up and said, I'm looking for some good Russian River grapes. Can you point me in the right direction? And this is actually Klopp Ranch.
Oh, wow.
Ted Klopp is the grower here, and she said, well, I've got some
That's
grapes
amazing.
that are available that I'm not using at this point, and you can have access to this vineyard until our program expands enough to use all the grapes.
Wow.
And so we got these Klopp Ranch grapes for quite a while.
Wow.
But we weren't allowed to call it Klopp Ranch at the
Yeah,
time,
yeah.
and that's why it's called Ted's.
Ted's. All right, now you know. Little secrets, you guys. This is a wonderful thing. You can also purchase older vintages through them. One of my favorites, and I'm going to save it for next time that I do a show with Scott or Marta, because Marta's awesome too.
No, she's much more fun than me.
She's actually super fun. We love Marta, but there's also one of my favorites is the Weir Vineyard that you get, and it's from up in Yorkville Highlands. It's not really well known for Pinot Noir, but believe me, people want that fruit. And William Sellium is probably the other one besides you. That's probably
they're the largest purchaser from that.
Yeah, and it's a vineyard that was planted back in 1992. And these old selections that they have there make that wine very, very special every year. I mean, it's one of my favorite wines ever from California. And it's a really good thing. So showing respect to these vineyards is a big thing for you.
Yeah, I don't want people to ever taste the wines and identify them as a Scott Rich wine.
Yeah.
I want them to identify the place where the grapes were grown, and that means that we need to get everything correct in the vineyard. And we work with all of our vineyard managers and our owners as sort of a team. And my job, once we get the grapes into the winery, is to not screw up their efforts and to really do as little in the winery as we can possibly do, because everything that we do shaves off a little bit of that original character. Right. That gives these wines a sense of place.
Important lessons here, you guys.
So the whole key to Pinot Noir is to figure out how to do as little as you can get away with doing, and that's hard. We're humans. We want to meddle with things. No.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Scott. This is like a great journey, as always, with you, going through these wines and tasting them, learning a little bit about the history of Pinot Noir and the clones and how they relate in relationship to Cabernet Sauvignon. But they can age. Never doubt that. But you have to have a great winemaker that can do that. And when you talk about boutique winemakers of Pinot Noir, I think about Scott Rich. And I think about the Talisman brand and Marta. You're awesome too. But it's just a special thing every time I get the chance to hang out with you. And I hope you guys can investigate this more. Look up talisman.com, and it's just awesome. It's a great wine. It really does speak truth about the vineyards that really they source from, and it's a big deal. That's a big deal in the Pinot Noir industry, to get your hands on the best fruit you can and treat it with total respect. And this is a great example. We got 4 of them right here in front of us. Thank you so much, Scott.
To your health and well-being.
Cheers.